A pizza delivery service in a small town near my home was where I started working at the age of 19. During my college tenure, I worked here to save money. My parents' residence meant that I didn't have to foot many bills. I was able to save about 80% of my income, which was nice. The manager gave me a promotion shortly after my first day there. He was impressed with my hard work ethic, but the responsibility that comes with a raise is also important. I was no longer solely responsible for pizza making, but also had to handle phone calls, dishes, and deliveries. Delivering pizza was a source of enjoyment for me. I loved the feeling of working in that position, which was almost like my job. I would come home with $75 or more in tips on most nights, along with my $12 per hour salary, which was not bad at all. I found pleasure in driving and enjoying music while doing my deliveries. I've always been aware that delivering deliveries at night in unfamiliar locations and in rough areas of the city or nearby villages was somewhat perilous. Unfortunately, there are instances when you come across non-digital individuals who attempt to make your life a living hell. Despite this, I maintained a relatively tranquil demeanor and was adept at maintaining my composure when such events occurred. This night in particular was a complete surprise, and I was completely caught off guard. Our restaurant had a guy who would call occasionally and say something strange, but then hang up right after, similar to a tongue-in-cheek situation. He once threatened to hit my mother, and the other time he inquired about my skin's flavor. We were always aware of the caller ID, but we couldn't prevent him from calling us. I'm assuming it's part of the company culture. Eventually, I completely stopped calling him. Thankfully, he eventually stopped calling me, but then contacted me months later, and I finally answered the phone. I recognized the tone of his voice and immediately understood who I was communicating with. He stated that he wanted a pizza, but his behavior was not typical. I received an apology from him who stated that he would not do it again and instead wanted to attend a pizza fair and square. A $1.30 tip will be given to the driver dispatched, as per one's statement, with the intention of apologizing and offering an apology. I regret not being able to say no to a customer's request. I didn't want to send one of the teenagers out there in the middle of night because my manager was already gone a few minutes earlier, so I decided to do it myself. I had no expectations of anything happening to me, and I believed I could hold on. I took his order and wrote down his address. After finishing the pizza, I got into my car and headed towards his house. The closer I got, the more I thought, maybe this isn't a good place. I experienced a sinking feeling that felt like dissimilarity. The vehicle was within a 12-minute drive from the county line, but it still managed to go quickly. If it was another mile away, we wouldn't have been able to deliver it. I was aware that I had to deliver this pizza, and it was too late to proceed. Before I could fully comprehend what I was getting into, I veered off the dirt road and arrived at the house. For a brief moment, I gazed at the mesmerizing, tall, white house. The air was devoid of light and oxygen, with no one visible or noticeable. I exited my vehicle, and when my headlight went off, I could barely see anything in the area that was visible. The pizza was supposed to be left on the porch, but I knew it wasn't appropriate and could potentially harm the guests. I remembered a $1.30 tip that he had given me. The door creaks and swish as I made my way towards the entrance, even before I could make contact. The individual in question was middle-aged, bald, and probably around 40 years old. "Hello, Josh. It's been a while since we last spoke. How did the man come across my name?" While gazing, I realized he must have read my name tag on my shirt. Nonetheless, it was quite unsettling considering the situation. "You're paying $23.22, sir." With a creepy expression on his face, he stared at me for an extended period before replying with an emphatic, "I see. Okay." That was the only thing he mentioned. I was anticipating his payment, but he was only staring at me with empty eyes. It was precisely at that point that he said one of the most cringe-worthy things that someone has ever expressed to me. "Has anyone ever tried to hurt you in the past?" "While making these deliveries?" he inquired. I gazed at him with a blank stare and replied, "No, don't tell me what you mean." There was no response, he stated. I simply pondered. Being in this place means you never know what's going to happen. His smile widened, as if his evil scheme was about to commence. I felt a surge of energy and anxiety that went beyond normal, and I threatened to leave without paying my tip or providing him with his money. As I rushed towards my car, I heard footsteps on the right approaching me from the distance and darkness. It's a good thing that I was faster than them, and I got into my car unharmed. I looked back and shut my door before starting the car. 2 grown men were positioned in front of my car, and one of them held a baseball bat. Both individuals were wearing ski masks. I was escorted out of there and never looked back. During my escape, I ran over an unidentified man who was also wearing a mask. The question of whether he was alive or not remains unanswered. It's possible that I was guilty of murdering her that night. I'll never be able to fully comprehend. The restaurant didn't believe me when I shared this story. Due to the fact that Jimmy is one of my good friends, I ended up quitting a few days later. After returning home that night, we contacted the police, but none of them were still present when I informed my parents. The house was unoccupied, and I have a strong conviction that the individuals in question were planning to cause my death, or worse. It seems unlikely that selling my organs through the black market is a viable option, doesn't it? Yesterday was one of the most traumatic events of my life. It all began on a typical Saturday. After working as a pizza delivery driver for almost 2 years, I quit on the same night. As a teenager, I was one of the neighborhood's degenerate kids that no neighbor would want. I'm only a little bit harsh on myself because it's the truth. On certain occasions, we would abandon houses a few streets down the road and perform the same task multiple times on different nights to achieve an improved outcome. The individual in question was identified as Mr. Johnson. He was familiar with most of the children in our household and had a lack of affection for us. He was aware of our activities in the local area, I think. It's likely that his degeneration was also a part of his childhood development. He must have thought we were the ones who came to his door on those nights. But he didn't have any evidence, and things always went smoothly between us. He's pondering whether he had an intuition. He threw hands on him over several weekends during the summer and was never caught. In September of that year, I started working as a night shift deliveryman and delivered pizzas. I was served a simple cheese pizza on the street where my parents lived in the same neighborhood, but I had no idea it belonged to Mr. Johnson's home. I didn't realize who the order was until I reached the middle of the street. The name was placed under Mark, which meant that it had to be Mr. Johnson's first name for me. I squirmed with pride and wished he didn't recognize me. I knocked on the door and waited, feeling like nothing had happened in the last hour or two. Finally, the door swung open. Within seconds, I was surrounded by Mr. Johnson, and I caught a whiff of his house's aroma. The smell emanating from that dwelling was quite unpleasant. It sounds like unrefined rubbish. With a creepy frown, he said hello. He came closer and crouched down to whisper something in my ear. He had a foul smell that reminded me of the unpleasantness of rotten I rarely venture outside my own neighborhood due to the fear of encountering him. My parents responded to my confession, stating that I was deserving of it because of my stupidity, which may be partially accurate, but I don't believe I merit the death penalty. Despite feeling guilty for my actions, I'm content with my life and want to continue living it. It could be that I'm the jerk. I was jobless and in need of a desperate solution. I gave birth to a child while my partner was unwell. The necessary funds were waiting for us, so I had to provide them. My tenure at General Motors was well paid, but I was eventually let go after being terminated. After researching job opportunities, I finally managed to get an interview after visiting every restaurant in town for a few days. In my small town where I grew up, there was a small pizza joint. After all these years, it was exciting to see how the food was made, as I had a great fondness for this place since childhood. Upon receiving the call for a driver, I agreed to join them. The job is as easy as it sounds, so I had to put my stuff behind my back and move on. Unlike what I thought I would, I wasn't required to prepare the food. My only responsibility was to deliver the pizza to the customers and maintain polite conduct during the delivery. The money was not substantial, but it ultimately paid for the bills. The last week I worked here after working here for approximately 5 months did not bring any significant issues. After this incident, I waited until my 2 weeks were up, but then decided to leave. After placing an order for a pizza, I got into my car and proceeded to drive away as usual. The only thing that got worse for me as a pizza delivery driver was the fact that customers didn't tip, and this happened twice, if not more frequently. Every night, I would give out approximately 10 pizzas, but there was always some guy or woman who didn't tip. The job was enjoyable, but it wasn't entirely necessary. I'm pretty sure what I encountered this evening was far more dreadful than a mean troll who accused the woman of not tipping occasionally. The location of the house in a rural area added an air of creepiness and intrigue. The house was not visible when I entered the driveway. The front yard was covered in trees, which made me feel apprehensive. Although it doesn't sound alarming, I've encountered horror stories that start like this before. I had no idea that I was going to end up like that, and I didn't know it. I proceeded to walk up the driveway until I came across the front porch. I immediately stopped the car and walked up there in a calm but nonchalant manner. I waited for a minute before finding a piece of paper with tape on the ground when I knocked down the door. The object seemed to have fallen from the doorway, affixed to the back of a $40 bill. The message was to bring the pizza inside, position it in front of the door. It was at that point that I began to feel nauseous. I didn't want to do that, so I decided to leave the pizza on the porch and then get back to my car. I wished I had left as planned, but regretted not doing so with the no asked. I left the car and headed back to the porch after debating with the devil and the angel on my shoulder for approximately 5 minutes. After opening the front door, I quickly put the pizza down. "I'm wondering if anyone else is here. Could you please inform me? Pizza is available at this location." I was frightened by the noise, but as no one answered, I ran away. I accidentally left the door cracked open while exiting. Shortly after, a man was seen trampling outside. All black attire was worn by him, along with an unsettling old man mask. I was under the impression that he held a large knife in his hand, which was shiny. As I exited, my heart raced. My life was spared by just a few seconds. It's a stroke of luck. That was the immediate consequence. I pondered with my own thoughts. I was completely taken aback. While enduring the horrors of growing up and experiencing similar events, I felt like the world was coming to an end, even though I knew I was safe. As I drove away from him on that night, I couldn't shake off my nightmares. He would pursue me and collide with me on the road, but he frequently ended up killing me. To my knowledge, there is no trace of this wicked individual. I called the police, but it didn't pan out as everyone expected that nobody owned a house. That was on the verge of being caught in a horrifying predicament. Don't be afraid to trust your instincts.